Elena Rodriguez had seen enough war to know that the universe had a twisted sense of humor, but she'd never expected it to express itself through alien wreckage scattered across a crater that still glowed with residual plasma burns. Her squad's patrol route through the Kepler Valley wasn't supposed to include crash sites that looked like someone had tried to build a cathedral out of liquid starlight and then blown it up with military-grade spite. "Command, this is Recon 7, Sergeant Hayes spoke into his comm unit, his voice carrying the weary professionalism of someone who'd learned not to sound excited about anomalies. "We've got unknown wreckage at grid reference Delta 77. Requesting Xenorc support and hazmat protocols." Elena crouched beside what might have been part of a hull, though it looked more like crystallized music than anything designed for space travel. The metal, if it was metal, shifted colors in the light, cycling through shades that her brain insisted didn't exist while her eyes stubbornly continued to see them. "Medic, get away from that thing," Hayes called. "We don't know what kind of radiation it's putting out." "My scanner's not picking up anything dangerous," Elena replied, though she kept her distance out of respect for Hayes's paranoia, which had kept their squad alive through 6 months of border patrol duty. "Whatever this stuff is, it's not radioactive. Might not even be from our dimensional framework." "Great. Interdimensional alien wreckage. That's exactly what this patrol needed to make my day complete." Private Chen, who'd been exploring the crater's far edge, suddenly stopped moving. Sarge? You need to see this." Elena followed Hayes toward Chen's position, her medic's instincts already cataloging the supplies in her field kit. Chen's tone suggested they were about to transition from routine patrol with weird discoveries to Elena's medical training becomes extremely relevant in ways she'd rather not think about. What they found was small, fragile, and definitely alive, though Elena's training hadn't prepared her for anything quite like it. The being was roughly humanoid but built like someone had redesigned human anatomy using principles borrowed from Art Nouveau and advanced physics. Its skin held an opalescent quality that made it seem to glow from within, and its large eyes reflected the harsh sunlight of Kepler 442b with the kind of depth that suggested intelligence far beyond what its apparent age should allow. It was also dying, which Elena's medic training recognized immediately despite having no frame of reference for the specific biological processes involved. "Holy shit," Chen breathed. "Is that a kid?" "Language," Hayes said automatically, though his attention was fixed on the alien child with the expression of someone whose worldview was being actively rewritten. "Command, we have a situation. Unknown alien, appears to be juvenile, showing signs of severe trauma." Elena was already moving, her hands reaching for her medical kit before her conscious mind had finished processing what she was seeing. The child's chest rose and fell with the irregular rhythm of someone fighting to stay conscious, and dark blue fluid that was probably blood had crystallized around what looked like plasma burns along its left side. "Don't touch it," Hayes ordered. "We don't know if it's hostile." "It's a child, Sarge. And it's hurt." Elena activated her medical scanner, which immediately began displaying readings that made no sense whatsoever. "Besides, I don't think something this injured is going to pose much of a threat." The scanner insisted that the child had 3 hearts, no kidneys, and a nervous system that appeared to be distributed throughout its entire body rather than centralized in a brain and spinal cord. Elena stared at the readings, then looked at the child, then back at the scanner. "Either this thing is the most alien we've ever encountered, or my equipment has decided to pursue a career in creative fiction," she muttered. "Rodriguez, step away from the specimen." "That's an order." Elena looked up at Hayes, seeing the familiar tension in his shoulders that meant he was preparing to make a decision that would probably make everyone unhappy. "Specimen? Sarge, this is a kid. A hurt kid. It's an unknown alien species found at a crash site in contested space. Protocol is clear. Protocol doesn't cover pediatric xenobiology, because the people who write protocol apparently assumed we'd never find alien children bleeding out in craters." Elena turned her attention back to the child, whose large eyes had focused on her with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "Besides, look at it. Does this look like a threat to you?" The child made a sound, soft and musical, like wind chimes made of crystal and starlight. Elena felt something in her chest tighten at the obvious pain in that sound, the way it seemed to carry meanings that transcended language barriers. Command, what are your instructions for hostile alien contact? Hayes spoke into his comm, his voice carefully neutral. Elena didn't wait to hear Command's response. She'd heard enough military discussions about alien contact protocols to know that hostile was often a matter of perspective, and contact frequently ended with phrases like neutralize the threat and secure the area. Her medical scanner indicated massive internal bleeding, though from organs it couldn't properly identify. The child's breathing was becoming more labored, and the crystallized blue substance around its wounds was spreading in patterns that suggested its alien biology was failing in ways Elena couldn't fully understand but recognized as terminal. Sarge, whatever Command says, this thing is going to be dead in 20 minutes if it doesn't get medical attention. Rodriguez. I know what you're going to say. Unknown species, potential contamination risk, possible intelligence value if we can keep it alive long enough to interrogate. Elena pulled out her emergency medical kit, which suddenly seemed laughably inadequate for the situation. But you know what? I didn't become a medic to let kids die while we debate protocol. The comm crackled with Hayes's response from Command, though Elena was too focused on the child to listen closely. The tone, however, was unmistakable. Hayes's shoulders went rigid with the posture of someone receiving orders he didn't like. Command says we're to secure the area and await extraction. The specimen is to be contained for transport to a xenobiology facility. The specimen has a name, Elena said, though she realized she was making an assumption based on nothing more than the child's obvious intelligence and her own stubborn refusal to reduce a dying kid to military terminology. And the specimen needs medical attention now, not after a 3-hour extraction process. Rodriguez, that's not your call to make. Elena looked at the child, whose eyes were beginning to lose focus as shock set in. She looked at her medical supplies, designed for human physiology and probably completely useless for whatever biological processes kept this little being alive. She looked at Hayes, who was a good soldier and a decent man caught between his duty and his conscience. Then she looked at her own hands, which were already moving to begin first aid despite having no idea how to treat an alien patient whose biology defied every medical principle she'd ever learned. Yeah, it is, she said quietly. Rodriguez, if you disobey orders, then you'll court-martial me. I get it. Elena activated a sterile field generator around the child, creating a small bubble of controlled atmosphere that would at least prevent further contamination of its wounds. But I didn't spend 2 years in xenobiology school and 4 years as a combat medic just to watch a kid die because someone decided alien children don't count as patients. The child made another musical sound, weaker this time, and one of its hands moved slightly toward Elena. Without thinking, she reached out and took the small hand in hers, surprised by its warmth and the way its skin seemed to shimmer at the contact. Hey there, little one, she said softly, using the same tone she'd use with any injured child. I'm Elena. I'm going to try to help you, okay? The child's large eyes focused on her face with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Elena felt a strange sensation, as if something was pressing gently against the edges of her consciousness, not intrusive but definitely present. For a moment, she could have sworn she heard something like music in the back of her mind. Sarge, Chen said quietly, the extraction team is 30 minutes out. Whatever she's going to do. Hayes looked at Elena, at the child, at his comm unit displaying orders he was legally bound to follow. Elena could see the war between his military training and his basic human decency playing out across his features. You've got 15 minutes, Rodriguez. Then we follow orders. Elena nodded, knowing it wasn't enough time but grateful for whatever she could get. She began examining the child's injuries more carefully, trying to understand how to treat a patient whose physiology seemed to run on rules she'd never learned. The plasma burns were the most obvious problem, but her scanner indicated internal damage that was beyond her ability to address in the field. The crystallized blue blood suggested clotting mechanisms that were either failing or working in ways she didn't understand. Most concerning was the child's obvious weakness, as if whatever powered its biological systems was running down like a battery. "Your blood is fascinating," Elena said, keeping her voice calm and conversational as she worked. "It's like your entire circulatory system is designed around some kind of mineral matrix. I bet your people have amazing healing capabilities when everything's working right." The child made another musical sound, and Elena felt that strange pressure at the edge of her consciousness again, stronger this time. For just a moment, she could have sworn she understood what the child was trying to communicate: gratitude, fear, and something that might have been hope. Elena's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she cleaned and dressed the wounds using techniques adapted on the fly for alien anatomy. The child's skin responded to her touch with subtle color changes, cycling through shades that seemed to indicate its emotional state. When Elena's treatment caused pain, the skin showed deeper, more turbulent colors. When she spoke soothingly or worked with particular gentleness, it shifted to warmer, brighter tones. "You're getting better at this communication thing," Elena told the child as she worked. "I bet you're way smarter than anyone gives you credit for, aren't you?" "Rodriguez, time," Hayes called. Elena looked at her handiwork, which was adequate by field medicine standards but probably insufficient for the child's long-term survival. The plasma burns were covered and sterile, the bleeding had mostly stopped, but the internal damage was beyond anything she could address without proper facilities and a much better understanding of alien physiology. "It needs more treatment than I can provide here," she said to Hayes. "Not our problem anymore. Extraction team can handle it from here." Elena looked at the child, whose eyes were clearer now but still carried the obvious fatigue of someone whose body was fighting a battle it might not win. The small hand was still clasping hers with surprising strength, and those large eyes held an intelligence and trust that made Elena's chest tighten. "What if they can't?" she asked quietly. "What if they can't what? What if the extraction team can't keep it alive? What if the xenobiology facility doesn't have the right equipment? What if this kid dies because we followed protocol instead of doing what was right?" Hayes's expression softened slightly. "Rodriguez, you can't save everyone. Sometimes the system has to handle things. The system doesn't handle alien children, Sarge. The system studies them, catalogs them, maybe dissects them if they die during transport." Elena felt the child's grip tighten on her hand. "This isn't a specimen. This is a kid who's scared and hurt and needs someone to care about whether it lives or dies." The sound of approaching aircraft filled the air, the distinctive whine of military transport vehicles coming in for extraction. Elena looked up at the sky, then down at the child, then at her own hands that were still glowing faintly from contact with alien skin. "Rodriguez," Hayes said, his voice carrying a warning. Elena made her decision with the kind of clarity that usually only came in moments of absolute crisis. She activated her personal emergency beacon, disconnected her comm unit, and scooped the alien child into her arms with the careful efficiency of someone who'd carried wounded soldiers through hostile territory. "Tell command that Medic Rodriguez went rogue," she said, backing away from the extraction site. "Tell them she deserted her post to provide medical aid to a non-hostile alien miner. Tell them she'll turn herself in when she's damn sure this kid is going to survive." "Elena, don't do this. Sarge, I respect you and I respect the service, but I won't let a child die because someone decided alien kids don't matter." Elena adjusted her grip on the child, who was looking up at her with those impossibly large eyes. "If that makes me a traitor, then I guess I'm a traitor." Hayes stared at her for a long moment, his hand resting on his sidearm but making no move to draw it. "You know I can't let you go. You know you can't stop me without risking the child's life." The extraction vehicles were getting closer, their approach vectors suggesting they'd be on site within minutes. Elena took another step backward, toward the edge of the crater where the terrain became rough enough to provide concealment. 15 minutes head start, Rodriguez. That's all I can give you." Elena nodded, knowing it was more than she'd had any right to expect. "Thank you, Sarge." Don't thank me. Thank me by keeping yourself alive long enough to face whatever court-martial is coming your way. Elena turned and ran, carrying the alien child across terrain that was definitely not designed for someone fleeing military justice while providing emergency medical care to a patient whose biology was a complete mystery. Behind her, she could hear Hayes on the comm, reporting her desertion in the flat, professional tone of someone doing his duty despite his personal feelings. The child in her arms made soft musical sounds that Elena chose to interpret as encouragement, though they might just as easily have been alien profanity. Its skin continued to shift colors, cycling through patterns that seemed to respond to Elena's emotional state as much as its own. "Well, little one," Elena said as she reached the cover of the crater's edge, "I hope you're worth throwing away my military career for. Because we're about to find out just how good I am at keeping alien children alive using nothing but stubbornness and a really inadequate understanding of xenobiology." The child's grip tightened on Elena's uniform, and for just a moment, Elena could have sworn she heard something like laughter in those musical tones. Despite everything, the desertion charges she was facing, the impossible medical challenge ahead of her, the fact that she was now a fugitive from her own military, Elena found herself smiling. "Yeah," she said, adjusting her grip as she began the difficult journey toward the abandoned mining station she discovered during previous patrols, "I think you're going to be worth it." The abandoned mining station looked exactly like what Elena had expected from 3 years of military engineering reports: functional, depressing, and designed by people who'd clearly never heard of the concept that humans might want to actually live in the spaces they built. The medical bay was a generous term for what was essentially a storage closet with pretensions, equipped with one diagnostic scanner that wheezed ominously when activated and a surgical unit that Elena was fairly certain had been salvaged from a food processing plant. "Well, Luz," Elena said to the alien child she'd been carrying for the better part of 6 hours, "welcome to the finest medical facility that desertion and criminal negligence can provide." She'd started calling the child Luz during the trek from the crash site, partly because the way light seemed to dance beneath its translucent skin reminded her of her grandmother's stories about angels, and partly because, "Hey you," seemed inadequate for someone she was risking court-martial to protect. The child had responded to the name with a series of musical tones that Elena chose to interpret as approval, though it might just as easily have been alien criticism of her linguistic creativity. The diagnostic scanner's response to Luz was immediate and thoroughly unhelpful. According to the readout, Elena was attempting to treat a patient who possessed either the most complex biology in known space or a medical condition that could only be described as creative interpretation of physical laws. 3 hearts, distributed nervous system, blood that crystallizes on contact with standard atmosphere, and what appears to be a secondary circulatory system that runs on photosynthesis, Elena read from the scanner display. "Either you're the most interesting patient I've ever had, or this scanner has developed a serious drug habit." Luz made a sound that Elena was learning to recognize as amusement, though the child's obvious exhaustion was beginning to worry her. The journey to the mining station had taken longer than expected, and despite Elena's best efforts at field medicine, Luz's condition was clearly deteriorating. The child's skin, which had maintained its opalescent shimmer during the trek, was beginning to fade to duller tones that Elena's instincts identified as problematic. The musical sounds that seemed to be Luz's primary form of communication were becoming weaker and less frequent, and the large eyes that had tracked Elena's every movement were beginning to lose focus. "Okay, let's figure out what you need," Elena said, settling Luz on the medical bay's single examination table with the careful movements of someone handling something infinitely precious and completely breakable. "My scanner thinks you're fascinating, but it's not giving me much useful information about how to keep you alive." Elena began a systematic examination, using techniques adapted from xenobiology training that had always seemed theoretical until now. Luz's pulse, or what Elena assumed was a pulse, was irregular but strong, felt through skin that seemed to shift texture under her fingers. The child's breathing was steady but shallow, and its temperature was slightly below human normal, though Elena had no idea what constituted normal for Luz's species. "You know what would be really helpful right now?" Elena said as she worked. "Some kind of medical database for your people. Maybe a user manual. Care and feeding of alien children, a practical guide for humans who've made spectacularly poor life choices. Luz's eyes focused on Elena's face with the kind of intensity that suggested the child was following the conversation despite the language barrier. Those large, luminous eyes held an intelligence that Elena was beginning to suspect was considerably more advanced than her apparent age suggested. Elena's attempts at treatment quickly revealed the fundamental problem with her situation. Every piece of medical equipment in the station was designed for human physiology, and everything she'd learned about medicine assumed carbon-based life forms that operated according to familiar biological principles. Luz seemed to exist in cheerful defiance of every assumption Elena had ever made about how living beings were supposed to work. The intravenous fluid that should have helped with dehydration caused Luz's skin to shift to alarming darker shades, suggesting either an allergic reaction or outright poisoning. The pain medication that Elena had hoped might help with the child's obvious discomfort resulted in musical sounds that were definitely not expressions of contentment, followed by what Elena was fairly certain were the alien equivalent of reproachful glares. "Right," Elena said after her third failed attempt at pharmaceutical intervention, "apparently your biology doesn't play well with human medical science. Let's try a different approach." She began observing Luz more carefully, looking for clues about what the child actually needed rather than what Elena thought it should need. The most obvious pattern was that Luz's skin seemed to respond to different types of light, brightening and shifting to more vibrant colors when Elena adjusted the medical bay's illumination settings. "You like the full-spectrum lighting," Elena observed, watching as Luz's skin took on a healthier glow under the brighter illumination. "Are you photosynthetic? Do you literally feed on light?" Luz made a sound that Elena was learning to interpret as confirmation, a musical tone that seemed to carry undertones of relief and gratitude. The child's breathing became noticeably easier under the enhanced lighting, and its eyes seemed to regain some of their earlier alertness. Elena spent the next several hours experimenting with different light frequencies and intensities, using the mining station's industrial illumination systems in ways that definitely violated several safety protocols. Luz responded to each change with immediate shifts in skin tone and energy level, creating a feedback system that allowed Elena to gradually optimize the child's environment. "You're like a walking mood ring crossed with a solar panel," Elena said as she watched Luz's skin cycle through increasingly vibrant shades under the customized lighting array she'd rigged up. "I bet your people have amazing architecture. Everything probably lights up and changes colors based on who's using it." Luz responded with a series of complex musical tones that seemed to carry more meaning than Elena could parse, but the child's improved energy level was obvious. The large eyes were brighter, the skin held its luminescent quality more consistently, and Luz was beginning to show interest in its surroundings rather than just focusing on survival. Elena's next discovery came through pure accident when she spilled water on the child while trying to clean its wounds. The liquid that contacted Luz's skin didn't run off as expected but was absorbed through the skin with visible color changes that suggested some kind of metabolic process. "You don't drink water," Elena said, watching as Luz's skin absorbed the moisture with obvious relish. "You absorb it directly through your skin. That explains why the four fluids were such a disaster. Your circulatory system doesn't work the way I assumed it did." Elena began misting Luz with clean water from the station's recycling system, watching as the child's condition improved dramatically with proper hydration delivered through the correct biological pathway. The plasma burns began to show signs of healing, the crystallized blue blood around the wounds started to dissolve, and Luz began making sounds that Elena was fairly certain indicated contentment. "There we go," Elena said, settling into a chair beside the examination table as Luz's condition stabilized. "Light therapy and topical hydration. Not exactly what they taught me in medical school, but apparently it's what works for your biology." The improvement in Luz's condition allowed Elena to focus on other concerns, like the fact that she was now officially a deserter from the colonial marines, probably facing charges that could result in decades in military prison, and completely dependent on a mining station that was supposed to be abandoned but still had functioning life support systems. "You know what the really crazy part of this situation is?" Elena said to Luz, who was now alert enough to track Elena's movements around the medical bay. 6 hours ago, I had a career, a clear sense of duty, and a reasonably predictable future. Now I'm talking to an alien child in an abandoned mining station while hiding from my own military. And somehow, this feels like the most right thing I've done in years. Luz made a musical sound that Elena chose to interpret as understanding, though it might just as easily have been alien commentary on human psychological complexity. The child's large eyes seemed to hold depths that suggested an intelligence far beyond what Elena would have expected from someone who appeared to be roughly equivalent to a human 8-year-old. Over the next several days, Elena and Luz developed a routine that centered around the child's unique biological needs and Elena's gradually expanding understanding of alien physiology. Elena learned that Luz required specific light frequencies at different times of day, needed regular misting with mineral-rich water that Elena had to create by dissolving mining station supplements in the recycling system output, and seemed to derive emotional stability from constant physical contact with Elena. The last discovery had come when Elena noticed that Luz's condition deteriorated whenever she left the medical bay for extended periods, but improved dramatically when she stayed close enough for physical contact. Elena began sleeping in the medical bay, one hand resting on Luz's arm, and found that the child's healing accelerated significantly with the constant connection. The abandoned mining station looked exactly like what Elena had expected from 3 years of military engineering reports, functional, depressing, and designed by people who'd clearly never heard of the concept that humans might want to actually live in the spaces they built. The medical bay was a generous term for what was essentially a storage closet with pretensions, equipped with one diagnostic scanner that wheezed ominously when activated and a surgical unit that Elena was fairly certain had been salvaged from a food processing plant. "Well, Luz," Elena said to the alien child she'd been carrying for the better part of 6 hours, "welcome to the finest medical facility that desertion and criminal negligence can provide." She'd started calling the child Luz during the trek from the crash site, partly because the way light seemed to dance beneath its translucent skin reminded her of her grandmother's stories about angels, and partly because, "Hey you," seemed inadequate for someone she was risking court-martial to protect. The child had responded to the name with a series of musical tones that Elena chose to interpret as approval, though it might just as easily have been alien criticism of her linguistic creativity. The diagnostic scanner's response to Luz was immediate and thoroughly unhelpful. According to the readout, Elena was attempting to treat a patient who possessed either the most complex biology in known space or a medical condition that could only be described as creative interpretation of physical laws. 3 hearts, distributed nervous system, blood that crystallizes on contact with standard atmosphere, and what appears to be a secondary circulatory system that runs on photosynthesis, Elena read from the scanner display. "Either you're the most interesting patient I've ever had, or this scanner has developed a serious drug habit." Luz made a sound that Elena was learning to recognize as amusement, though the child's obvious exhaustion was beginning to worry her. The journey to the mining station had taken longer than expected, and despite Elena's best efforts at field medicine, Luz's condition was clearly deteriorating. The child's skin, which had maintained its opalescent shimmer during the trek, was beginning to fade to duller tones that Elena's instincts identified as problematic. The musical sounds that seemed to be Luz's primary form of communication were becoming weaker and less frequent, and the large eyes that had tracked Elena's every movement were beginning to lose focus. "Okay, let's figure out what you need," Elena said, settling Luz on the medical bay's single examination table with the careful movements of someone handling something infinitely precious and completely breakable. "My scanner thinks you're fascinating, but it's not giving me much useful information about how to keep you alive." Elena began a systematic examination, using techniques adapted from xenobiology training that had always seemed theoretical until now. Luz's pulse, or what Elena assumed was a pulse, was irregular but strong, felt through skin that seemed to shift texture under her fingers. The child's breathing was steady but shallow, and its temperature was slightly below human normal, though Elena had no idea what constituted normal for Luz's species. "You know what would be really helpful right now?" Elena said as she worked. "Some kind of medical database for your people. Maybe a user manual. Care and feeding of alien children, a practical guide for humans who've made spectacularly poor life choices." Luz's eyes focused on Elena's face with the kind of intensity that suggested the child was following the conversation despite the language barrier. Those large, luminous eyes held an intelligence that Elena was beginning to suspect was considerably more advanced than her apparent age suggested. Elena's attempts at treatment quickly revealed the fundamental problem with her situation. Every piece of medical equipment in the station was designed for human physiology, and everything she'd learned about medicine is. Elena's peaceful routine with Luz was shattered at 0347 hours by the distinctive sound of military transport vehicles approaching the mining station with what could charitably be called aggressive enthusiasm. The child, who had been sleeping peacefully under the customized lighting array Elena had constructed, immediately woke with a series of alarmed musical tones that needed no translation. "It's okay, Luz," Elena said, though she was already moving to collect the medical supplies she'd organized around their makeshift treatment area. "I was expecting this eventually. Military efficiency may be an oxymoron, but military persistence is unfortunately very real." Elena had spent the last week preparing for this moment, setting up contingency plans and backup medical stations throughout the mining facility. Luz's condition had improved dramatically under Elena's care, but the child was still dependent on the specific light frequencies and mineral supplementation that Elena had learned to provide. Moving their operation would be complicated, but Elena had always known that staying in one place indefinitely wasn't an option. The transport vehicles settled onto the mining station's landing pad with the subtle grace of mechanical rhinoceroses attempting ballet. Elena counted at least 3 aircraft, which suggested that her desertion had attracted considerably more attention than a simple AWOL medic usually warranted. "Well, Luz, it looks like we're about to become significantly more popular," Elena said, checking the portable lighting unit she'd rigged up for emergencies. "I hope you're ready to meet some new humans, because they're probably going to have a lot of questions about both of us." Luz responded with a series of musical tones that Elena had learned to recognize as concern mixed with determination. The child's skin was cycling through colors that suggested anxiety but also a kind of resolve that Elena found both touching and slightly worrying. The mining station's external cameras showed Elena exactly what she'd feared, a full tactical team led by someone whose body language screamed, career officer with personal investment in the outcome. Elena recognized the lead figure immediately, Captain Marcus Webb, her ex-boyfriend and someone who'd never quite forgiven her for choosing xenobiology over a more conventional military career path. "Perfect," Elena muttered. "They sent Marcus. Because this situation definitely needed the added complexity of unresolved romantic drama and professional jealousy." The facility's comm system crackled to life with Marcus's voice, carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was taking this operation very personally. "Elena Rodriguez, this is Captain Webb. You're surrounded and have nowhere to run. Come out with your hands visible and surrender the alien specimen for proper containment and study." "Specimen," Elena repeated to Luz, who was watching the external displays with obvious intelligence despite the language barrier. "You hear that? You've been promoted from, 'kid I'm trying to keep alive,' to specimen. Congratulations on your advancement in military terminology." Elena activated the station's external comm system, which connected her to Marcus's team with the kind of audio quality that suggested the mining company had spared every possible expense on communication equipment. "Hello, Marcus," she said, keeping her voice calm and professional despite the circumstances. "Nice to see you too. I assume this is about my unscheduled vacation from active duty." "Elena, what the hell do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in right now?" "I'm providing medical care to an injured child, Marcus. Same thing I've been trained to do for the last 6 years of my military career." Elena glanced at Luz, who was following the conversation with obvious interest despite not understanding the words. "Though I admit the patient demographic is a little more exotic than usual." "That's not a child, Elena. That's an unknown alien species that could pose a significant threat to human security. You've violated about 17 different protocols by making unauthorized contact, and desertion charges are just the beginning of what you're facing." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach at Marcus's tone. She'd expected military efficiency and protocol adherence, but there was something else in his voice, a kind of professional hunger that suggested he saw Luz not as a person but as an opportunity for career advancement. The unknown alien species was dying when I found it, Marcus. It's about 8 years old in relative development, it's been nothing but cooperative and grateful for medical assistance, and it's shown more emotional intelligence in the last week than some humans I know. That's not your determination to make, Rodriguez. You're a medic, not a xenobiologist or a diplomat. Your job was to report the contact and let qualified personnel handle the situation. Elena looked at Luz, who had moved closer to her during the conversation and was now maintaining physical contact with Elena's arm. The child's skin was showing colors that Elena recognized as fear, but also trust, absolute faith that Elena would continue to protect it regardless of what the other humans outside might want. My job is to preserve life, Marcus. Species is irrelevant when you're talking about keeping a kid alive. Elena, I'm trying to help you here. If you surrender now and cooperate fully, I might be able to get the court-martial reduced to administrative discipline. But if you keep this up, you're looking at treason charges. Elena felt Luz's grip tighten on her arm, and suddenly her mind was filled with images that definitely hadn't been there moments before. She saw Marcus and his team through Luz's perception, not as potential rescuers but as predators, beings whose emotional resonance carried undertones of violence and acquisition rather than care or protection. The realization hit Elena like a plasma charge to the chest. Luz wasn't just intelligent, it was telepathic or empathic or something similar, capable of reading the emotional intentions of the humans outside. And what it was sensing from Marcus's team was making the child terrified in ways that had nothing to do with fear of the unknown. Luz, Elena said quietly, what are you sensing from them? The child's response was a complex series of musical tones accompanied by images that flooded Elena's consciousness. Marcus's team approaching with weapons ready, discussions about containment and vivisection, and most disturbing of all, absolute certainty that Elena would be considered expendable once they had secured the specimen. Oh, hell, Elena breathed, understanding suddenly that this wasn't a rescue operation but a recovery mission, and she was as much a liability to be eliminated as Luz was a prize to be claimed. Elena activated the mining station's security systems, which were considerably more robust than their medical facilities. Magnetic locks engaged on all external entrances, and defensive barriers rose from the facility's perimeter with the solid efficiency of equipment designed to protect valuable mining operations from hostile wildlife. Elena, what are you doing? Marcus's voice carried sharp irritation mixed with what sounded like genuine concern, though Elena was no longer sure she could trust her ability to read his motivations. I'm protecting my patient, Marcus. And apparently, I'm protecting myself as well, since Luz seems to think your intentions toward both of us are significantly less friendly than your words suggest. You're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. I'm making this exactly as complicated as it needs to be to keep an alien child from ending up on a dissection table. Elena began activating the mining station's emergency protocols, systems designed to protect the facility and its occupants during catastrophic equipment failures or hostile native wildlife encounters. Luz isn't a specimen, Marcus. It's a person. A very young person who's scared and hurt and deserves better than being treated like a laboratory curiosity. The facility's external sensors detected Marcus's team beginning to deploy heavy equipment around the mining station's perimeter. Elena recognized the setup patterns from her military training. They were preparing for a siege, not a negotiation. Elena, you've got 10 minutes to surrender before we start cutting through your defenses. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Elena looked at Luz, who was now actively projecting images into her mind, not just emotional impressions but specific tactical information about Marcus's team, their equipment loadout, and their planned approach vectors. The child's telepathic abilities were apparently much more sophisticated than Elena had realized, capable of detailed intelligence gathering as well as emotional communication. Can you tell me what they're really planning? Elena asked Luz, who responded with a flood of images that made Elena's blood run cold. Marcus's team wasn't just planning to recover an alien specimen, they were preparing to eliminate any witnesses to unauthorized human-alien contact, including Elena. The orders they'd received painted both Elena and Luz as security threats that needed to be contained permanently, and Marcus had apparently accepted those orders without question. Well, that's disappointing, Elena said, though she was already moving to implement the defensive strategies she'd hoped she'd never need to use. I always knew Marcus was ambitious, but I didn't think he'd graduated to murdering ex-girlfriends and alien children for career advancement. Elena activated the mining station's communication array, broadcasting on emergency frequencies that would reach every military installation within 50 light-years. If Marcus wanted to make this situation officially complicated, she was prepared to make it legendarily complicated. This is Medic Elena Rodriguez, currently providing humanitarian medical aid to a non-hostile alien miner at Mining Station Delta 77. I am reporting attempted assassination of both myself and my patient by Captain Marcus Webb and his tactical team, apparently acting under orders that violate both medical ethics and basic human decency. Any commanding officers receiving this transmission should be aware that Captain Webb is attempting to eliminate witnesses to successful interspecies medical cooperation. Elena's broadcast was immediately jammed, but not before it had propagated through several communication relays. The damage was done. Whatever cover story Marcus had been planning to use would now have to account for Elena's public accusations. Elena, you just made this situation much worse for everyone involved. Marcus's voice carried genuine anger now, the professional courtesy finally dropping away to reveal something harder underneath. Good, Elena replied. Because maybe, much worse, will involve someone with actual authority asking questions about why you're planning to murder a medic and an alien child instead of following proper first contact protocols. Luz suddenly stiffened in Elena's arms, its skin shifting to colors that Elena had never seen before, deep, vibrant hues that seemed to pulse with their own internal light. The child's musical communications became more complex, with harmonics and overtones that created patterns Elena could feel as much as hear. What is it, Luz? Elena asked, though she was already sensing that something fundamental had changed in the situation. The mining station's proximity alarms activated with the distinctive warble that indicated incoming spacecraft, not the human military transports that Elena had expected, but something else entirely. The external cameras showed shapes approaching through Kepler 442b's atmosphere that defied several basic principles of aerodynamics while managing to look like someone had tried to build starships out of crystallized music. Oh, Elena said, understanding suddenly why Luz's skin was showing colors she'd never seen before, I think your people just arrived. The alien vessels settled around the mining station with the kind of graceful precision that made human military transports look like flying bricks. Elena counted at least 12 ships, their crystalline hulls reflecting the harsh sunlight of Kepler 442b in patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Marcus's voice over the comm carried a note of panic that was almost satisfying. Elena, what did you do? What kind of signal did that thing send? I don't think Luz sent any signal, Marcus, Elena said, watching as beings of obvious intelligence and equally obvious power began emerging from the alien vessels. I think it's been broadcasting our location continuously since the moment I picked it up, and its people just finished traveling however many light years it took to get here. Elena looked at Luz, whose colors were now cycling through patterns that could only be described as joyful anticipation mixed with something that looked very much like vindication. The child made musical sounds that Elena had learned to associate with deep satisfaction, as if events were finally proceeding according to some plan that only Luz had been aware of. You knew they were coming, didn't you? Elena asked. You've been in contact with them this whole time. Luz's response was a series of musical tones that Elena now understood carried meanings of gratitude, affection, and something that might have been an apology for not being able to explain the situation more clearly earlier. Elena watched through the external cameras as Marcus's tactical team found themselves surrounded by alien beings whose obvious technological superiority made human military equipment look like children's toys. The approaching aliens moved with the kind of fluid grace that suggested they were comfortable with their own power, and their obvious focus on the mining station made it clear that they were here for Luz. Well, Marcus, Elena said into the comm system, I hope you're ready for some really interesting conversations about interspecies diplomacy and the proper treatment of alien children, because I think the people who actually have authority over Luz would like a word with you. The being who entered the mining station moved like liquid starlight given form and purpose, her presence filling the small medical bay with an authority that made Elena's military training snap to attention despite having never encountered anything remotely like her before. She was clearly of the same species as Luz, the same opalescent skin, the same large luminous eyes, the same pointed ears, but where Luz radiated childlike vulnerability, this being carried power that seemed to bend reality around her elegant frame. Elena's first coherent thought was that she was probably looking at Luz's mother, though the family resemblance was secondary to the obvious fact that she was in the presence of someone accustomed to being obeyed by entire star systems. Her second thought was that Marcus and his tactical team had just made what military strategists would classify as a career-limiting error of catastrophic proportions. "You are the human called Elena," the being said, her voice carrying harmonics that bypassed Elena's ears and seemed to speak directly to her nervous system. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Your Majesty. Highness. I'm sorry, I don't know the proper form of address for alien royalty," Elena said, maintaining her position beside Luz while trying to project respectful confidence instead of the absolute terror she was feeling. "Are you Luz's mother?" "I am Queen Sereleth of the Zephyrian sovereignty. Luz Thera is my heir and the future of my people." The Queen's attention shifted to Luz, and her expression transformed from regal authority to something much warmer and infinitely more dangerous. "My child, are you well?" Luz responded with a complex series of musical tones that Elena's newly developed understanding of the language suggested carried meanings of safety, gratitude, and deep affection. The Queen listened with the focused attention of someone parsing every nuance of communication, her luminous eyes never leaving Luz's face. "Your human has cared for you with great skill," the Queen said, though Elena noticed that her assessment was directed at Luz rather than Elena herself. "She has kept you alive and healthy despite having no knowledge of our biology or our needs." "Elena saved my life," Luz said, switching to accented but clear English that caught Elena completely off guard. "She carried me from the crash site when her own people ordered her to abandon me. She risked her career, her freedom, and her safety to provide medical care when my injuries should have been fatal." Elena stared at Luz, who was now speaking human language with the kind of fluency that suggested the child had understood every word of every conversation they'd shared over the past week. "You've been able to speak English this entire time?" "Learning your language was necessary for complete communication," Luz replied, though Elena caught undertones of apology in the child's voice. "But musical communication carries emotional contexts that spoken words cannot express. I wanted you to understand my feelings as well as my thoughts." Queen Sereleth's attention returned to Elena with an intensity that made standing upright feel like a significant accomplishment. "You deserted from your military to protect my heir." "Yes, Your Majesty," Elena said, deciding that honesty was probably her only viable strategy when dealing with beings who could apparently read emotional intentions. "Luz was dying, and my commanding officers were more interested in following protocol than preserving life. I couldn't let a child die because someone decided alien kids don't count as patients. And when your military came to retrieve both you and my heir, you chose to resist rather than surrender Luz Thera to their custody." Elena glanced at the external monitors, which showed Marcus and his tactical team in what appeared to be a very uncomfortable conversation with several Zephyrian warriors whose elegant appearance couldn't disguise their obvious lethality. "I chose to protect my patient from people whose intentions toward both of us were clearly hostile." Queen Sereleth followed Elena's gaze to the monitors, her expression shifting to something that made the air temperature seem to drop several degrees. "Yes, I have been observing your Captain Webb's approach to interspecies diplomacy. His methods are instructive." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mining station's environmental controls. "Your Majesty, whatever Marcus was planning, he was following orders from superiors who probably saw this as a unique intelligence opportunity. Most humans aren't. Most humans are not being judged here," Elena Rodriguez, Queen Sereleth interrupted, though her tone remained calm. "Only those who chose to treat my heir as an object to be studied rather than a person to be protected." The Queen moved closer to Elena, her presence carrying subtle harmonics that seemed to resonate with Elena's bones. Luzthera was taken from our vessels by extremist factions who sought to prevent the alliance I have been negotiating with your colonial administration. They believed that harming my heir would make me abandon diplomatic efforts in favor of military responses. They tried to start a war by kidnapping Luz, Elena said, pieces of the situation finally clicking into place. They succeeded in revealing the true nature of human character, Queen Saraleth replied. Some humans, when presented with a helpless alien child, see an opportunity for exploitation and advancement. Others see a person in need of protection and care. Elena looked at Luz, who was watching the conversation with obvious intelligence and what Elena was learning to recognize as pride. Luz, you knew what this was about from the beginning, didn't you? You knew your mother was coming, and you knew this would become a test of human intentions toward your people. I knew my mother would find me eventually, Luz replied. Our quantum entanglement ensures that I am never truly lost to her. But I did not know whether the humans who found me would choose compassion or exploitation when faced with someone different from themselves. Queen Saraleth's expression softened as she looked at Elena. My heir speaks of you with great affection and respect. Luzthera claims that you treated our differences not as obstacles to overcome but as interesting problems to solve. That you spoke to my child as a person rather than a specimen, and that you provided comfort as well as medical care. Luz is easy to care about, Elena said simply. Smart, funny, brave, and surprisingly good at communicating complex ideas even when we didn't share a common language. Any decent person would have done the same thing. Any decent person, perhaps, Queen Saraleth agreed. But decent people, I have learned, are less common than one might hope, particularly when dealing with those who are different or vulnerable. The Queen extended her hand toward Elena, palm up in what appeared to be a formal gesture. Elena Rodriguez, you have preserved the life of my heir when others would have allowed death or caused harm. You have shown kindness where others showed only calculation, and courage where others showed only ambition. In the name of the Zephyrian sovereignty, I name you Luzthera's guardian, with all the rights and responsibilities that such a position entails. Elena looked at the extended hand, then at Luz, who was practically vibrating with excitement and making musical sounds that needed no translation. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but I should probably point out that I'm currently facing desertion charges, possible treason accusations, and a court-martial that could result in decades in prison. I'm not exactly qualified to be anyone's guardian. The charges against you have been dismissed, Queen Saraleth said with the casual authority of someone accustomed to reshaping political realities through simple declaration. The colonial administration has been persuaded that your actions were in the best interests of interspecies relations and that punishment would be counterproductive to ongoing diplomatic efforts. And Marcus? His team? Captain Webb and his tactical unit are being debriefed by Zephyrian diplomatic specialists who are very interested in understanding the decision-making processes that led to planned assassination of medical personnel and alien children. Queen Saraleth's smile held undertones that suggested Marcus's debriefing was going to be thoroughly unpleasant. I suspect their military careers will be taking new directions. Elena placed her hand in the Queen's, feeling a strange tingling sensation as their skin made contact. For a moment, Elena's consciousness was filled with images of crystalline cities that sang with harmony, beings of light and music moving through spaces that defied conventional physics, and technologies that merged art with science in ways that made human engineering look primitive. But more than the alien wonders, Elena sensed the Queen's genuine gratitude and respect, emotions that transcended species barriers and spoke to the fundamental connections that could exist between beings committed to protecting those they cared about. The position of guardian carries significant responsibilities, Queen Saraleth continued as the formal connection faded. You will be Luzthera's protector, teacher, and advocate as my heir learns to navigate relationships between our peoples. You will have access to Zephyrian medical and educational resources, diplomatic immunity within human space, and authority to speak for Luzthera in matters affecting my child's welfare. Elena looked at Luz, who was watching her with obvious hope and anticipation. And what does Luz think about having a human guardian? I think, Luz said with the precise diction of someone translating complex thoughts into a second language, that I would like very much to continue learning about humans from the one who taught me that different does not mean worthless, and that caring for others is more important than following rules. Elena felt something warm and unexpected settle in her chest as she realized that her impulsive decision to save one alien child had somehow evolved into the kind of life-changing opportunity that people spent careers hoping to encounter. Well, in that case, Your Majesty, I accept the position of guardian, with the understanding that I'm probably going to need a lot of guidance about Zephyrian customs and diplomatic protocols. Luzthera will teach you, Queen Saraleth said, her expression holding the kind of maternal satisfaction that transcended species boundaries. My heir has already demonstrated considerable skill at cross-species communication and education. The Queen turned to address both Elena and Luz together. The alliance between our peoples will require individuals capable of bridging the differences between human and Zephyrian cultures. Luzthera will need to understand humanity not as an abstract concept but through genuine relationships with humans who see past surface differences to fundamental values. You, Elena, will provide that understanding. Elena realized that she was being offered not just a job but a completely new life. One that would involve helping to shape the future relationship between two species while raising an alien child who represented hope for peaceful coexistence. It was terrifying, impossible, and absolutely perfect for someone whose life had already been defined by making spectacularly unconventional choices. There is one more thing, Queen Saraleth said, her tone shifting to something more formal. The title of guardian is permanent, Elena Rodriguez. Once accepted, it cannot be revoked or transferred. You will be part of Luzthera's life, and by extension part of Zephyrian society, for as long as you both shall live. Elena looked at Luz, who was watching her with those large, luminous eyes that had first captured her attention in a crater full of alien wreckage. The child who had started as a desperate medical emergency had become something much more important. A bridge between worlds, a symbol of what was possible when beings chose compassion over fear, and most surprisingly of all, family. Your Majesty, Elena said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, I can't think of anything I'd rather spend my life doing than helping Luz become the person they're meant to be while learning what it means to be part of something larger than my own species. Queen Saraleth's smile was brilliant enough to illuminate the mining station's medical bay with its own light. Then welcome to the family, Guardian Elena. May your service bring honor to both our peoples and joy to the child you have chosen to protect. As Elena settled back into her chair beside Luz, now officially the guardian of an alien heir and humanity's first interspecies diplomat, she found herself thinking about the strange mathematics of choice and consequence. A week ago, she'd been a military medic whose biggest decision was which medical supplies to requisition for the next patrol. Now she was part of a galactic alliance, responsible for helping an alien child navigate the complexities of interspecies relations while simultaneously learning to be part of a family that spanned the stars. So, Luz, Elena said, watching as Queen Saraleth began making arrangements for their transition to a more permanent living situation, ready to teach your new guardian about Zephyrian culture and diplomacy? I am ready, Luz replied, reaching out to take Elena's hand with the same trust that had carried them through their first week together. But first, I think we should teach you to sing. Zephyrian families share musical compositions as expressions of emotional bond, and I have been composing a song about the human who carried me to safety when my own people could not. Elena squeezed Luz's hand, feeling the familiar warmth of connection that had sustained them both through crisis and change. I'd like that very much. Though I should warn you, my singing voice has been known to cause structural damage to military equipment. Luz's laughter, musical and bright and completely joyful, filled the mining station's medical bay with harmonics that seemed to promise a future full of discovery, challenge, and the kind of love that transcended every boundary the universe could create. Then, Luz said with the wisdom of someone far older than their apparent years, we will compose songs that turn structural damage into beautiful music. That is what families do, they find ways to make even the broken things sing.